Good evening or good morning, Nightlings. This is episode 3 of season 2 of the Horror Headquarters. And today's topic, as you guys may already see by the headline, is about the Menendez Brothers case. Now, I've been meaning to talk about this case for a while, but I wanted to make sure I was as educated as possible before I made an episode on it. Now, I've been actually researching this subject since 2019. Yes, because for one of my psychology classes, I decided to pick the Menendez brothers and discuss that the reason for their crimes was because of their abuse, the sexual abuse, and the verbal abuse, physical abuse by their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez. But now, 5 years later, I'm here to, in a way, kind of summarize the case for you guys, or to even elaborate on things that I feel like are constantly missed. Because a lot of people will just continue to state that they did it for the money, that they're just rich white kids and they just wanted to get away with murder. And I'm here to kind of educate you on the facts. I'm not here to educate you on my personal opinion. I'm here to educate you on the facts because I'm going to be using facts to back up what I'm saying throughout this episode. So I hope you guys enjoy it. I hope you guys listen. I hope you guys have an open heart and an open mind to really hear what I'm going to be discussing in this episode. And we're also going to be discussing the new developments around the case because there's lots going on. If you guys haven't heard, I don't even know if this episode is going to be out by the time something is concluded with the resentencing that is potentially going to be happening. But before we get into all that, let's dive right into the episode. And let's go to August 20th, 1989. On the evening of August 20th, 1989, Lyle and Eric Menendez entered the family room of their home in Calabasas, California, and they killed and brutally murdered Jose and Kitty Menendez, who were their parents. This all happened around 10 p.m. when they entered the room with shotguns. Now, the images are very, very graphic. They shot their parents in the head. They basically made them look unrecognizable, and it was definitely a very brutal murder that was done by them. Now, they ended up phoning in the police saying that like someone came in and killed our parents. They didn't know what it was. Or like someone, they're not here. We don't know what's going on. We just came back from a movie. This is something that people constantly misconstruct. They didn't call them immediately. What happened was they killed them, they took the guns with them, and they left, and they tried getting like a movie ticket. It's just a constant alibi that people may use, be like, oh no, I was busy doing this or doing that. But that's what they tried doing. They came back, and as soon as they did, they called the police. And yes, you can hear this audio on YouTube. A lot of people say that what they did was kind of manipulation because they were fake crying and they were trying to seem like they were shocked by the murder. And then as soon as police arrived, they labeled it as some type of mob hit. They didn't know what had happened, but as soon as everyone knew what was happening, it sent a shock wave through the community. Because if you did not know, Jose Menendez was a very, very huge figure in the entertainment industry. He was a self made millionaire who had risen from humble beginnings as a Cuban immigrant and then rose to a man of power and influence. He ended up becoming the COO of RCA Records. He was just a really big business person and he was making loads and loads of money. So when the nature of the crime happened, especially the way that Jose was shot multiple times, even after he was already dead, it made investigators think that this was some kind of professional revenge, that probably the mafia was involved or there was some kind of mob hit that killed him and his wife. And as a result, the police did not even think to check Eric and Lionel Menendez for their fingers, for gunpowder, or any type of residue that would make them ultimately responsible for the murders. They also just left out a lot of different things. Even Eric and Lyle themselves, they said they have no idea how they got away with the murder that day. And they said they were extremely, extremely lucky because if the police had even checked one of their fingers or took their DNA or like scanned their fingerprints or anything like that, they would have been immediately thrown in jail. Suspicion didn't even turn on the brothers until a couple months later, when Lyle and Eric, who initially seemed like grieving victims, began raising eyebrows with their behavior in the weeks following the murder. Just days after the funeral, they started spending money, a lot of money, um, For example, Lyle purchased a $60,000 Porsche, Eric hired a tennis coach, and the brothers took lavish trips to Europe, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on clothes, watches, and many other different types of luxuries. And their spending spree wasn't just excessive, it was flaunted, and people started to wonder if they were trying to cover something up. And as a result, the police became more focused on the brothers as suspects, and they believed that the motive was clear: money. Jose had a fortune estimated between 14 million and 16 million, and if the brothers were to inherit the wealth, then they could continue living the lives they wanted without the shadow of their father's control. And as a result, that's how the general public, the prosecution, and the media started to see these kids: spoiled rich kids who killed their parents for money. But was it really that simple? Now, keep in mind that for months, Eric and Lyle Menendez denied having any involvement in their parents' deaths. They were arrested in March of 1990, almost 7 months after the murders. On October 31st, 1989, Eric Menendez confessed to the murders during a session with his therapist, Dr. Jerome Oziel. And what's important here is that during these therapy sessions, Eric didn't just talk about the crime, he talked about why it happened and how he did it. He and Lyle had been sexually, physically, and emotionally abused by their father for years. Jose, the man who seemed to be a self made success story, was also, according to the brothers, a violent and manipulative monster behind closed doors. Now, Jerome Oziel, being the phenomenal therapist that he was, ended up recording the sessions and saying that he did it for his own protection, only for them to be used against the brothers in court. And his mistress, Judalyn Smith, ended up finding out about the murders from Jerome Oziel and reported it to the police, and it's what caused the brothers to be arrested in March of 1990. Now, there's something I want to include right now. A lot of people say they could have just told the therapist, they could have told someone about what was happening, and they could have ran away. You're downplaying the power that Jose Menendez had over his kids. For one, Jose Menendez made his therapist sign an agreement that everything that was told by the brothers in these therapy sessions that he would receive a copy of. So there was nothing that they could hide. And this just shows you how controlling of a person he was. If Jose was dealing with the boys upstairs, and when I mean dealing, you know exactly what I'm talking about, then no one could enter the room. No one could even go upstairs. And the family of Jose and Kitty Menendez also testified to this in court as evidence in the first trial, stating how aggressive he was, that one of them even saw the abuse that these brothers would experience while the family was over, but they didn't say anything. And then suddenly, this case wasn't about two spoiled rich kids killing their parents for money. It was about two young men who, from the age of 6, had been subjected to horrors no child should ever endure. Yet, despite the gravity of their claims, many in the media and the public were skeptical. Why? Because we've been so conditioned to see certain people as untouchable. Wealthy, powerful families are not supposed to have these kinds of dark secrets. Everything's supposed to be perfect. If you have money, you have no problems. And this is where the media played a significant role in shaping how the brothers were perceived. From the very beginning, they were portrayed as privileged, arrogant, and guilty. News outlets had already decided that this was about money and greed, and anything that didn't fit that narrative, like the claims of abuse, was downplayed or dismissed. Talk shows, newspapers, and TV networks treated the Menendez brothers as a joke. Their allegations of abuse were mocked. For example, on Saturday Night Live, they were made fun of the way they were dressed, their hairstyles, their tears in court. Everything was scrutinized. And instead of treating them like two young men who may have been victims of unspeakable trauma, they became the butt of national jokes. It was open season for public ridicule. And let's not forget, this was also the era of sensational trials. The O.J. Simpson trial was right around the corner, and the Menendez case was the precursor to that level of courtroom drama. The media saw dollar signs in turning trials into entertainment and to just make a quick buck. They positioned Jose and Kitty Menendez as victims and Lyle and Eric as the monsters, but the courtroom told a very different story. During their first trial in 1993, the defense presented a harrowing picture of what life was like for the brothers. Witnesses, including family members and friends, testified to the abuse. They described a household dominated by fear, and Jose Menendez was said to be controlling, domineering, and abusive, not just to his sons, but also to his wife, Kitty. Kitty herself was described as deeply depressed, often medicated, and emotionally unstable. She was either unable or unwilling to protect her children from the abuse. The defense argued that after years of torment, the brothers snapped. They believed their parents were planning to kill them to stop them from revealing the family's dark secrets. Some context right here. Lyle did not know that Eric was being sexually assaulted by his father. And when he found out that he was reportedly furious and devastated and went to Jose, confronted him about the abuse, threatening to expose him if it didn't stop. Lyle then claimed that this confrontation escalated the already tense and abusive situation within the family, and this is what caused both Lyle and Eric to testify that they lived in fear of their father, and the abuse that they endured was all part of a broader pattern of physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. The brothers said that after Lyle confronted Jose, they became increasingly afraid for their lives, believing that their parents were planning to kill them to prevent the abuse from being revealed. This fear, they claimed, ultimately led them to murder their parents in what they described as an act of self-defense. Now, some more context about Kitty Menendez. Jose was having an affair, and Kitty knew this, and this is one of the reasons why she was constantly on medication, like why she was constantly always erratic, and her knowledge of Jose's infidelity contributed to the already volatile environment in the Menendez household, which included emotional, psychological, and sexual abuse. And her awareness of the affair added to the family's dysfunction, with both Eric and Lyle later testifying about how their parents' relationship was tumultuous and abusive. Now, going back to the first trial, it ended up ending with a hung jury because the jury could not decide if the brothers were guilty of first-degree murder, second-degree murder, or if the abuse justified their actions. The trial was a grueling emotional spectacle, with Lyle and Eric breaking down in tears as they recounted the abuse they endured. Many jurors were sympathetic to their stories, which is why they couldn't reach a unanimous verdict. But in 1995, during the retrial, the tables turned. The judge in the second trial did not allow the defense to present any type of abuse as a central argument. In other words, the jury in the second trial did not hear the same testimony about what had happened in the Menendez household. They didn't hear about the years of sexual and emotional abuse, they didn't hear about the fear that led them to the murders, and they were presented with the simplified version of the case: two men who killed their parents for money. And the jurors were given two choices: did they kill their parents or did they not kill their parents? Now, just saying that enrages me and boils my blood because I have no idea how this was even allowed during a second trial. This judge was obviously the biggest a-hole ever to even consider not letting any of the evidence be entered into the second trial and to only give the jurors two options: murder or nothing. Like, they either are charged for murder and they're thrown in prison, or they are not thrown into jail or prison and they are freed with no charges. Obviously, it was going to go one way because they did commit the murders. They admitted to the murders, but that wasn't the original case that was being circulated in the first trial. And thus, the mockery of Lyle and Eric Menendez continued, and one prosecutor, who goes by the name of Pamela Bozanick, stated, and I quote, "I would like to say, first of all, that men cannot be raped because they lack the necessary equipment to actually be raped." Those are her words, not mine. This was a testimony in the 1990s that is absolutely disgusting and it's abhorrent. And I promise you, if that was stated in today's court, it would not bode well with anyone. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people out there that still have that ideology that men cannot go through that kind of situation. It's just devastating to me that this was said during a court case and she got away with it. And she even states by that today. She stands by like what she said and that the brothers are cold-blooded murderers because there was a recent documentary that was released by Netflix called The Menendez Brothers in which she was interviewed, and wow, she is I can't even call her human because the ideology and the mindset that she has is horrible and it's disgusting and it's like, what? Now, moving to the second trial, in March of 1996, Lyle and Eric were convicted of first degree murder and they were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole instead of receiving the death penalty because many of the jurors stated that they couldn't bear to put them to death because if it were true, they said if it were true, the stuff they went through, they do not deserve the death penalty. And the abuse they had suffered was erased from the courtroom, from the record, and from the public narrative. The media had played a significant role in shaping public perception. I just want to reiterate that. That perception didn't allow for the complexity of their case. And okay, I admit it. The brothers' lavish spending after the murders became the headline. It overshadowed the years of abuse that had led up to that point. It was not a good idea. It was not a good take. They shouldn't have done that. But their reasoning behind it was they wanted to completely forget what happened. They didn't want to even bear for a second the actions that they committed, and they were trying to distract themselves. Now, this is from them. I'm not saying that on behalf of them. This is what they stated why they were spending money. It just baffles me that the fact that they were survivors of long term sexual and emotional abuse was basically an afterthought. But in the years since their conviction, public opinion has slowly shifted. In recent years, more people have come to the question of the fairness of their second trial. Could their actions have been the result of years of trauma? Did the system fail to recognize the impact of abuse on these two young men? With the rise of movements such as Me Too, we've seen a shift in how we talk about abuse, especially abuse that happens behind closed doors in wealthy, powerful families. If this case had happened today, do you think the Menendez brothers could have been treated differently? Would the media have been more willing to believe their claims? Would their abuse have been taken seriously from the start? I think these are the questions we need to ask ourselves as we look back at the Menendez brothers case through a modern lens. The narrative that was sold to the public in the 1990s was one dimensional. It was shaped by a media hungry for sensational headlines, but in reality, the story of Lyle and Eric Menendez is far more nuanced. It's a story of abuse, trauma, and ultimately a failure of the legal system. Now let's talk about that failure for a moment. In the first trial, the defense was able to present evidence of the abuse the brothers suffered. Testimony from the family members, friends, and even Eric's therapist helped paint a clearer picture of what life was like inside the Menendez home. The juries heard about the constant control and terror that Jose inflicted on his sons. The abuse, which began when the boys were young and continued for years, was described in graphic detail. Eric's testimony in particular was heartbreaking, recounting how his father would force him into sexual acts or in how he feared for his life if he ever disobeyed. It wasn't just sexual abuse, though. Jose was described as emotionally abusive, controlling every aspect of their sons' lives. He dictated their futures, their education, their careers, everything. On the subject of Kitty Menendez, a lot of people think, well, she was innocent, she shouldn't have been killed. She knew what was happening and she was complicit in the abuse, either turning a blind eye or even participating in some instances of emotional abuse. This kind of upbringing would have had lasting effects on anyone. Experts who testified in the first trial explained how long term abuse could distort a person's reality, leading them to act in ways that may seem irrational or extreme to an outsider. This is exactly the reason why I discussed this case in psychology class because I was talking about the mind and how their perception of life was destroyed and it was taken from them by their parents, which is what caused them and drove them to commit these murders. Now, even today, a lot of people state that the legal system failed them and that if they were tried today, would they have been given a different sentence? Were they given justice? Me personally, I would argue no. The full story was never told in that courtroom, in that second trial. The jury was denied the chance to understand the brothers' actions in the context of their abusive upbringing, and this is where tragedy lies. Not in the brutal murders of Jose and Kitty Menendez, but in the way the system and the media failed to recognize the complexity of the case. And this is really what I hope you guys take away from this episode, because as someone that's been doing research on this case for over 5 years, I personally, along with so many other people, do not think that these brothers are cold blooded killers. They went through this trauma, they experienced it. There is evidence, especially recent evidence, of a letter that Eric wrote to one of his cousins stating the sexual abuse months before they ended up taking the lives of their parents. So this is new evidence that's entered into a recent claim that is being done as I speak right now on this episode. Not only that, but one of the Menendez brothers, which was under RCA records, states that he was sexually assaulted by Jose Menendez. That is also another piece of evidence that has been discovered in 2023, which just further provides substantial evidence that these brothers were not lying, that they did witness all of these horrors as kids, and especially growing up in a traumatic and very toxic home environment. Now, it's crazy to even be saying this, but they're saying that a resentencing is possible by the end of this week. By the time this episode is released, there is an expected resentencing to be made on the Menendez case to take in the new evidence, and hopefully a decision is met. Hopefully, these brothers walk free. Again, I know a lot of you are probably going to be thinking, oh my god, do you want them to be free after they brutally killed their parents? Yes, and let me explain why. Because they should have been charged for manslaughter and not first degree murder. Just do your research. And when I say do your research, I mean actually dive deep into it. Don't just look at the surface and don't be so easily swayed by what the media. And I promise you, if you look deep enough, you will realize that that second trial was a joke, that it was extremely, extremely unfair, and that the way that these brothers were treated, both inside and outside the courtroom, is horrific and it's blatantly disgusting. Now, though a resentencing is expected by the end of this week, there is a hearing that is scheduled for November 29th, according to Gaskin, who is the district attorney. Now, in recent developments, there have been many artists that have come out and expressed their concern for this case and pleading for them to be freed. One being Kim Kardashian, who has become an extremely big, prominent figure in the law world, being that she took the bar exam and that she's been committing her life to helping people in prison that have received unfair trials or people that she believes deserve a second chance. Now, obviously, the story goes much deeper, but she's recently visited the prison where the Menendez brothers were housed along with Ryan Murphy's Monster star Cooper Koch, who plays Eric in the second season of the Netflix miniseries. And the reason for their visit was to talk with the brothers about the Green Space Project, which is what Eric and Lyle are both spearheading, which is meant to make life in prison more closely resemble the outside world. Now, I just want to mention that both Eric and Lyle are educated, that even Lyle received a degree while in prison. Eric leads meditation sessions, he's always painting, and they're just living their lives right now in prison. And from what the correctional facilities are saying, as well as many people that work there, have stated that the brothers have been exhibiting really great behavior while in prison. Now, the reason I bring up Kim Kardashian's impact is because she's been advocating for prison reform since 2018 and has been studying to become a lawyer. She did pass the baby bar exam, and she's even helped Alice Johnson get released from a life sentence after reading about her story on Twitter in October 2017, as well as many other situations where she's been trying to assist in prison reform and helping people that don't deserve to be in there for the sentences that they were given. Now, this is an example of when being a celebrity or being someone that's like a high public figure comes in handy because she's taking her recognition and power that she has and she's turning it into something good. And I have respect for that. Whether you like or dislike her, I'm not saying I absolutely love the Kardashians because I don't, but I respect when people try to do good with their positions in life. I also want to announce that there was a recent public event in which family from Jose and Kitty Menendez, as well as people related to the Menendez brothers, came and expressed their pleas and interest in wanting the brothers to walk free. Even Kitty's sister, who is, I believe, about 90, she had an entire speech about how she wants the brothers to come back home and that she would love to help them in any way that she could. And just hearing her story touched my heart because I do think that many of you guys should go onto YouTube and search up the recent public event that they had where they expressed their interest in wanting to see the brothers walk freely, and then they ended up walking across the street and further pleading for the brothers' release. Now, I hope by discussing this episode, it's brought some light to certain things that much of the media and people will leave out in the story, that many presentations of the brothers has been left out. I mean, I won't name names, but there's a bunch of stuff out there that is extremely, extremely false and it's all fabricated. But that's for you to decide, and that's for you to find out. I shouldn't even say decide. That's for you to find out by doing the research and finding out the facts. I hope the next time I talk about the Menendez brothers that they're walking free, that they're able to live a life outside of prison, surrounded by their family. I hope that Eric is reunited with his daughter and his wife, and I hope that Lyle is also reunited with his wife as well. And they're just reunited with family all together, and they're able to live a prosperous and happy life, even though trauma does last forever and it does not leave either the family or the Menendez brothers' worlds. It's just something that I hope that they receive because I really do want to see these brothers walk free. Because having done research on this case for over 5 years, I am beyond horrified, devastated, and traumatized by the stuff that they claim they experienced. And I really hope that I live to see the day they walk out, whether it's this week, whether it's in November, no matter when. I just hope that they're freed and able to live their lives outside of prison. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts on this case. Please sound off in the comments below on Spotify. If you are listening on any other platform, please feel free to follow us on Instagram at the Horror Headquarters and drop a comment on our recent post, or even going on YouTube where we also have this podcast and dropping your thoughts over there. I appreciate you guys all for taking the time to listen to this episode in full. As I said, this is only the tip of the iceberg of this case. I've tried to express as much attention as I could towards the Menendez brothers in this episode. I do plan on doing multiple episodes on this case about evidence that's been ignored, about things a lot of people overlook or don't even bother to do research on. I'm just always looking for avenues and ways to further show the evidence that was portrayed by the Menendez brothers in their claims of abuse that they experienced, as well as so many other aspects that have to do with this case. Because being someone that's done research for 5 years, there are so many layers to this case. But one thing's for sure, these brothers are not cold-blooded killers, in my opinion. And yes, I know there's a bunch of new series out there about Eric and Lyle Menendez. There's previous documentaries on them. I do recommend watching the Menendez Brothers, which is a documentary. And if you want to watch monsters, you can go ahead. But again, just be sure to know what's fabricated and what isn't, because there is a lot of inaccuracies in that series. And I'll just stop there. So thank you guys for listening. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. If you did, please make sure to rate and follow us on whatever platform you're listening to us on. Please make sure to check out our links below, because there is also the website, which is called justiceforericandlyle.org, and it's a petition that you can sign that will go straight to the district attorney's office stating that you believe that the brothers should be freed. You can go on there, educate yourself, and this is something that was created by the family. So if you guys want to check it out, it is linked below in the description. I do plead you guys to do your research on this case if you are at all interested. There's a bunch of resources out there, credible resources that you can look into. You can read books that have been created by the families, that have been created by jurors that were on the case. There's just so much sources out there for you guys to look into. Again, I hope to come back talking about the Menendez brothers with good news, hopefully, on a future episode. Because when news breaks out of whether they're resentenced, whether they're charged for manslaughter instead of first-degree murder, whatever the case may be, I will be hopping back on the podcast to just give you guys a refresher of what's been going on with this case. Also, be sure to share this episode with anyone you think would be interested in learning more about the case. If someone already has a pre-existing opinion and they haven't been fully educated on the case, I hope that this episode can further educate them on how everything went down and how they were portrayed by both the media as well as in and outside the courtroom, and just give them more information on the case overall. Again, there will be many follow-ups to this case in the future. I truly appreciate the support, and until next time, tread very lightly and pray for forgiveness. Midnight hour is approaching.